Everybody, welcome back. I'm the Strategy Professor, and today we're going to be looking at my one-trick video for Season 12. So as always, if you enjoy the content, please be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out a ton on the channel. Come by, check us out on Twitch, starting around 11:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, usually going till about 2:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's a very friendly, chill community. We'd love to have you out there. And be sure to stay tuned for future updates on YouTube as well. So we're only streaming on Twitch, but we are still going to be doing lots of fresh new guides, tier lists, and other content on YouTube. So be sure to watch both platforms. Follow, like, subscribe. And you can also follow me on Twitter, the Strategy Professor, at the Strat Prof. It's a really useful place if you just want that extra layer of notifications, right? I don't post anything political. I don't post like food pics or funny cat pics or whatever on Twitter. It's just a place where I give you extra announcements whenever I release content and whenever I start streaming. So just in case Twitch or YouTube don't give you those announcements, Twitter's just another layer that can give you the announcements. So be sure to follow on there too if you want. Okay, let's go ahead and get in here. So in general, I just like to start off doing this every year, but just talking about why you should one trick or main or whatever the popular phrasing for it is right now, why you should focus on a very small set of champions, and then I'll go into what I think are the top 5 for each role. I know that one trick has kind of been a dirty word lately, and people have changed it over to I want to main this champion instead of one tricking the champion to try to avoid sort of that that negative baggage that goes with one tricking. But I think it's important to ask, why the negative baggage? Why do people seem to hate one tricks? Well, a couple of reasons. Number one, at really high levels of play, so when you're thinking about pro play and challenger, it could potentially be a detriment to one trick because people will know who you are, you can get stream sniped, and if the person's one trick gets banned, then they're going to be a lot worse on most other champions. So that's why a lot of streamers don't like one tricks, because they'll get a one trick on their team, the one trick will be banned, and then somebody has to dodge, or there's going to be a very disadvantageous matchup. So that's where a lot of the negative press comes from. But if you're down, if you're not challenger, even at diamond, and definitely lower than that, no one's going to be stream sniping you, and if you're picking the right kinds of one tricks, it should be fairly rare that you would get banned out. So it's not as much of an issue as a lot of the challengers make it out to be. So that's kind of the negative side of it, is if you don't get to play the champion that you have a lot of experience on, then you can be at a disadvantage. However, if you do play that champion, you're at a massive advantage most of the time, because just like everything else in life, whenever you have a lot of experience on something, that's heavily correlated with a lot of success on something, right? The more times that somebody has done something, the more they're going to know about it, the more they're going to know what to do in different situations when things don't go right, the more they're going to know how to optimize all of their situations. So when you one-trick things, you don't have to think about what you should be doing in a given situation. You're going to know, right? You're going to know when you can take trades. You're going to know when you should all in. You're going to know when you should run away. You're going to know your important power spikes in terms of items and levels, right? And so that frees up your mind to do things like watch the minimap a little bit more, shot call a little bit more, think more carefully about team comps and macro decisions and all of that stuff. Versus if you're just playing a whole bunch of champs you don't have experience on, you're going to constantly, be tunnel visioned and, unsure of what you should do in certain situations. You may not notice incoming ganks on the minimap, just all the inverse of the good things that I just mentioned. So that's why one tricking or maining or whatever you want to call it, having a narrow champion pool is advantageous, because you're just going to know what to do in more situations, and more likely than not, you're probably not going to get banned unless you're, a famous streamer and people are stream sniping you. So that's good. And Riot is never going to do this, but what I've said is, they should show enemy nameplates. They should show who's on the enemy team so that you could make more informed choices about bans, so that you could ban out one tricks to make for a better balanced game, because the most imbalanced thing right now that can happen in the game, other than someone, trying to deliberately throw the game one way or another, is getting a one trick up against someone who's auto-filled. So getting that one trick Riven who has 2,000 games top lane against, the auto-filled Malphite is going to be disastrous. That's one of the worst things that can happen matchup-wise. And they already show enemy names on in professional play. Obviously, you're going to know who they are, but in the client. I forgot what it's called, but those little like mini tournaments that they do, they already show the enemy names there as well. They just won't do it in solo queue because people like to one trick. People like to buy all the skins for their favorite champions, and it would just probably be a bad business decision to do it. So until they do that, I think that one trick is going to be one of the best ways to climb, and you see that all the time. Unless it's a pro player, a lot of high-end Diamond, Master, and Challenger players are going to have very narrow champion pools. They're just going to have a small collection of champions they do really well on, and other stuff they don't do so well on, because that's just a really efficient way to climb. So what are the qualities of good one tricks then? What should you be looking for when you're thinking about which one tricks are good? Well, these are guidelines, and very few champions are going to meet all of these guidelines, but here are just some numbers to look at that you can kind of play along at home and think about what you might want to main or one trick. Right, so less than 25% solo queue presence. So one thing to consider is you want to be able to play the champion, right? So that means that if the champion's getting banned all the time or it's getting picked all the time, then it's going to be unlikely you're actually going to be able to play the champion consistently. So if you do play a champion that has greater than a 25% solo queue presence, that means that you need to have a good backup plan in mind, just in case that champion is banned or picked. And there are some champions on this list that have greater than a 25% presence. Several of them do, but it is ideal if you can pick some things that don't have that kind of presence. And then less than a 75% pro presence. So again, this is kind of rare because if a champion is really strong in a given meta, it's likely that either pros are going to be playing it or a lot of people in solo queue are going to be playing it. There are some hidden gems out there that just people haven't discovered or that you can really unlock in terms of power if you play them a lot. And I try to find as many as I can on this list for you. But let's be honest, it's rare. Most people find out what's good and they play it a lot every batch. So it can happen, but these are just two good things to look for there, because if it has a high pro presence, it's likely it's going to have a high solo queue presence. There's a really high correlation. Or if it has a high pro presence, even if it's not super popular in solo queue, there's a good chance it could get nerfed. So you want to try to play things that are not going to get nerfed out. So something like Azir, Rise, Gangplank, stuff like that are never super popular in solo queue, but they are very, very popular in pro, and that's why they have been nerfed over time. So you want to watch out for that. Greater than a 5% delta is nice. You can see that stat on Lowalytics. That just means if you play the champion a lot, so like people who are sort of best in the world, what is their win rate? So basically, what are the best one tricks win rates versus a normal person's win rate? And if something has a relatively high delta, that means that it's usually pretty high skill cap, or you're going to be rewarded for playing the champion a lot. So that's just kind of nice to look for. Something that's overpowered, and that is obviously a subjective term, but I think there are 4 different sort of categories of power on a champion, and you want to look for champions, ideally, that have at least 3 of these. So resilience, which you can think of that in terms of tankiness. The champion is difficult to kill. It has high armor, magic resist, shields, different sorts of mechanics that make it difficult to kill them. Maybe they're immune to damage, or they're difficult to target. Something of that nature. They're hard to kill. They're hard to pin down. Damage, they just do a lot of damage. Mobility, so they're able to, rotate around the map. They're able to dodge skill shots. They're able to gap close and get on top of people. Mobility. And then utility. So they just do other things that are unique or special that help your team win one way or another. Maybe they take towers really quickly. Maybe they buff up your allies. Maybe they debuff the enemy. Maybe they have a ton of crowd control. Just something about them makes them unique in a bunch of different situations. Proficient in many metas. This is important as well. So when you're playing a one trick, or when you're picking something to main, you want to be thinking longer term, not just what's good on this patch, but what is likely to be good for the entire season and perhaps beyond. Because if you're going to drop hundreds of games, on a champion, you don't want that champion to be bad, in 4 or 5 patches, right? Either because their core item got nerfed out, or they personally got nerfed, or other champions that they're really good with or good against got, taken out of the meta. So you want to think, is this champion good in a split push meta? Is this champion good in a team fight meta? Is this champion good in a meta with poke mages? It says champion good in meta centered around objective control. So nothing's going to be good in literally every single situation, or very few champions will be. But you want something that's going to be a little flexible, that has, you know, different ways to win the game. It can build different items and be useful. It can have a different playstyle and be useful. Anytime you can find that type of thing, that's going to be good. Limited enemy counterplay. So you want to be able to pick your one-trick champions early, blind, in the dark. So there will be counterplay, obviously, out there, but you ideally don't want to pick things that can be really hard countered by popular champions, right? Or that, you know, require very specific conditions to be good. You want to pick stuff that's broad, that you can blind pick and have a pretty decent matchup into most things, or at least you can manage it if it's a bad matchup, and you can still be useful later on. Versatile itemization choices and runes. You don't want champions that are specifically tied to items that are really overpowered that might be nerfed. So if your champion is, you know, only good if Sterix is a super powerful item, you need to be careful, because if that, you know, gets nerfed, you know, obviously that can be a problem. So, you know, obviously most champions are going to have a preferred build path, but a lot of the best one-trick champions have alternatives that they can build just in case certain items get nerfed or other items get buffed. So look for that whenever possible. And then a versatile playstyle, kind of fitting into the previous couple of points. It's nice if you can pick a champion that snowballs when they're ahead, that can get back into the game when they're behind. Maybe they have some kind of utility that can help them out, that can flex. That's really nice for one trick. So if you play something and you want to, you know, play it mid lane, can you also play it bot lane? Can you also play it in the jungle or in the top lane? So not a lot of champions can go to multiple roles, but there definitely are some that can be effective in multiple roles. So just think about that if that's possible. So for example, you know, if you main Yasuo mid, do you feel comfortable playing Yasuo top if you have to? Could you play Yasuo ADC or something if you had to? So just thinking about the versatility of the pick. And then versatile win cons as well. Can you win with split pushing? Can you win with team fighting? Can you win with, you know, assassination or objective control? Are there just different ways that you can pressure and win the game to match your team comp? Okay, so let's go ahead and get into the picks here. I know we had a little bit of preamble there, but I just want to kind of lay out the kind of things that I think about when I'm thinking about what's a proficient one trick. And again, very few champions, if any, are going to meet all of these criteria, but I think these are all sorts of things to keep in your mind if you're trying to main a champion. So which ones would I recommend? And these aren't necessarily in order. I tried to put them a little bit in order, but a lot of them are interchangeable depending on how good you are on these champions. Another thing that I didn't say here, but a lot of times you want something that's relatively high skill cap. So the reason that you want that is it's gonna depress the win rates. So a lot of the champions on this list are going to be like probably in the 48 to 51% win rate or win rate range, because they are hard to play, and a lot of amateurs who don't play them a lot are going to be bad on them if they don't play with them. So that's going to depress the win rate. Why is that good? Because then it's less likely to get nerfed, right? If it's a champion that has a 48% win rate, you know, Riot does nerf those from time to time if they're very good in pro, but it's a lot less likely to get nerfed if it's than if it has like a 54% win rate, right? So you want stuff that's hard to play, so that it keeps the noobs out of there. Or if they, you know, if they do want to play it, they're going to have a low win rate. It's less likely to get nerfed, and yeah, and it's more rewarding to play. Like it feels good. It's like, man, I just had this awesome outplay potential. Because if you're going to be playing the same champion a lot, it better be interesting for most people, right? And so I think that's why a lot of people gravitate their one tricks towards the heavy, you know, mechanical champions, just because mastering the champ can feel so good. It can feel very cool, very fun, and it's just less likely to get nerfed because a lot of people aren't going to be good on it. Okay, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get in here. All right, so number one, Camille. Now, I will say Camille is somewhat of a dangerous pick because a lot of people complain about Camille in higher elos. I don't know how she hasn't been nerfed significantly. She did get tapped a patch or two ago, but it doesn't matter that much. However, right now she only has a 15% presence. She is one of the golden ones that I think meets almost all of these criteria. She has a 15% presence in solo queue. In pro, there haven't been a ton of games played on this patch. But she's only got a 42% presence in pro with a 48% win rate, so that's good. You don't want her going off in pro, or she will get nerfed much harder. So she meets those criteria. And then all of these things, she has it, right? She has resilience. She has the shield on her passive. She has a little bit of sustain off of her W in the laning phase. The items that she gets usually do have some extra survivability as well. So often she's going to get things like Titanic Hydra, like Divine Sunder, things of that nature. So she is pretty hard to kill. She does a ton of damage, especially with her Q. Whenever you get that empowered second part of your Q, it turns a certain portion of the damage into true damage. So your base damage plus the Q damage is true damage. And if you have a Sheen item, like a Trinity Force or a Divine Sunder, that on-hit damage, for some reason, also converts to true damage. So she can do, like, pretty comfortably, 1,000 true damage in the mid to late game on people. She just absolutely deletes people, so it's pretty ridiculous. But yeah, she does a ton of damage, and that also works against towers, so she shreds towers really quickly. She has great mobility with her hook shot. She can get away from almost anything. She can gap close on top of people. And then she has great utility with her ultimate, right? She can lock down a single target where they're not getting away, right? Excellent gank assist. If the jungler ever comes up and you're anywhere on the same screen, you're probably going to get on top of them and lock them down. It's a free kill. Later on in the game, in team fights, if you choose to show up to team fights, you can flank in, get on the back line, ult the AD carry or whatever, and they're not going to be able to get away. So she's just really, really powerful overall, and she has a wide variety of items that she can get too over time. So she's not tied to any specific items. It's like, yeah, right now Divine Sunder is good. Divine Sunder gets nerfed, no problem. She can just run Trinity. Trinity gets nerfed, no problem. She can just run Ravenous Hydra early, which also has a pretty high win rate, although it is a pretty low sample size. But as you can see, there are just a lot of items that are really good on her, right? Like all of these are going to be like in the 55 to 56% win range, second item, which is weird because she has a 48% win rate. But if she gets to 2 items, all of a sudden that goes up to 55 or 56%. So she just scales really well into late game. She can split push. She can flank and kill people in team fights. She can isolate and kill people. She can assassinate. She can do almost anything that you want her to do. And it's been that case basically since inception. As you can see, kind of the chart, she just goes up and up and up. And she's not even that hard to play mechanically. There's some of it, but it's not like some of these other picks on here, like Riven and Irelia and stuff like that. It's pretty straightforward. You just kind of auto-attack a lot. You choose when you're going to go in. And you just, have to make the decision on your Q. You have to either wait to get the true damage or you have to do it instantly if you think you have to. But other than that, pretty simple champion. That's very, very effective. So you do have to survive the early game. There are some matchups that can be tough in the laning phase against some of these bully champions out there. But if you can just hang around and just not get blown out, and especially once you hit level 6, get the jungler up there, you can snowball and definitely take over some games. Okay, Riven's another one, and this is just a classic. Anyone that's ever historically talked about one tricks for top lane, you kind of have to mention Riven somewhere in the conversation. Now, she doesn't have a high pick rate or ban rate right now. She has almost no pro presence, so that's good to go. She's just very difficult to play mechanically. A lot of people would probably say that she's probably the most difficult mechanical champion in the game. There are lots of animation cancels you can do with her, but you don't want to cancel your auto attacks. Just go watch a YouTube video about it. I'm not an expert on Riven, but there are a lot of people that talk about the combos. There's slow combos, there's fast combos. She's very, very difficult to master mechanically. But if you do get her down, I mean, she's got the whole kit. She's ready to go, right? She's got a shield off of her W that can be pretty significant. Or actually, that's the stun. I guess her E is the shield. Gives her mobility, multiple dashes, knockups, stuns. So, you can stop the enemy when they're trying to cancel stuff or when they're trying to dash or flash away or whatever. If you're really proficient, you can stop the mobility with all of those things. Her ultimate scales, really well with all the bonus AD that you're going to get. Gives you a little bit of extra reach to finish people off. She does, all of her damage is AoE. So if you can get in there in a team fight and hit people with, multiple Qs, Ws, ults, you can completely delete an entire team if they're grouped up. The wide variety of items that she can get. There's a wide variety of items that she can get historically. Okay. So right now, Gore Drinker has been pretty strong on her. But historically, you know, there are a ton of different items that she can get and be effective. Ghost Blade is what people are getting. In the past, she's gotten Cleaver. She probably could get Sterix, Death Stance. You know, the Bruisers have really, really good items. They got them buffed quite a bit last season. Hey, Rory, Daddy's making a video, okay? Can you go back out there and play with Hammy? We can't be screaming in here, okay?
No, I'm talking.
Okay, but you're screaming at Hammy, and Daddy's making a video, okay? We gotta take it.
I'm just trying to talk to you.
Okay, but we gotta take it down a little bit here. And then anyway, so she has a lot of different items that can be good on her, and a lot of different play styles. She can split push, she can 1v1. She has really good team fighting, like I said, because she has the AoE. So she's just got it all covered. She's probably the most famous one trick of all time. There have been tons and tons of players that have become famous, from Best Riven NA to, you know, Revenge to, you know, any number of other players that have one tricked and done extremely well on Riven on the ladder. So she doesn't, and another bonus is she's almost never played in pro, because it's really dangerous if you fall behind on her, and a lot of people know how to play against her in pro. So that is actually really good that she's not going to be nerfed because of that. And she's not super popular. Like, people like her, people play her, but she's not as popular as Yone, Yasuo, that type of stuff. So anyways, very, very good choice. If you're wanting to one trick, you're going to lose a lot of games while you learn her, but if you get her down, she's pretty much the perfect one trick. And then Shin is another one. If you want something that's a little bit less mechanical, or something that's not like a super hard carry champion, in the sense of like very high damage, you know, needing to snowball, that type of stuff, Shin is great. And he's in a really good spot right now in the meta, but I think historically he's almost always playable and pretty strong, because he can build tank items, but he can also get some pretty good damage items as well. So like Titanic Hydra historically has been very good on him. They just reworked the Frostfire Gauntlet, which is pretty good on him. So there are in the past, I think he may have taken Trinity Force or Divine Sunder or something like. At least that's an option that's on the table. It may not be the best at all times, but even just like Sunfire is fine on him. There's a lot of different ways you can go with him, but he's tanky in lane, and he has really good global presence, obviously with his ult. So especially with the teleport nerf coming in at the start of the season here, just having a champion that can you know, rotate to bottom with that teleport, and the enemy top laner can't answer that, is going to be huge. And he's very good with dive comps as well, which are usually pretty strong in most metas, right? So if you have a Jarvan that's diving the back line, or you have a Kha'Zix that's jumping back and flanking, or you know, a Diana who's wanting to go in, you can just ult on top of that and just come right into the fight. So that makes him, you know, really good global presence, pretty good split pusher, because, you know, he can teleport later in the game. He can R and get in there. He has great utility as well with his taunt. It's a really good CC in team fights. You have your E, or your W rather, which blocks auto attacks, not just for you, but for everybody else that's within that circle as well on your team. And he has pretty high damage. He can surprise you with quite a bit of damage with his Q, especially once he gets that Titanic Hydra. So he's not going to be able... Okay, Rory, Daddy's making a video, okay?
No.
Okay, can you just go out there? Okay, can you just go play with him?
No one is looking for me.
Okay, we'll go...
Nobody's looking for me.
Well,
okay.
Okay, go see what they're doing, okay, honey? They'll play with you. I'm sorry, guys. I'm trying to get the content out to you, but the kids are running around all the time right now. Hopefully she'll go chill in just a second. Okay, Rory. Okay, Rory, can you go just play with them for a second, please? Daddy's making a video. Okay, so anyways, so we're gonna move on. So again, sorry about the outburst, but I think she's getting situated in there. So we'll move on to the next one here, because I do want to, like I said, I do want to try to cover all of these in an hour, so we're gonna have to pick it up a little bit. Fiora is another one that I think is pretty good. Her mechanics aren't that hard. The one thing that you do have to do with her is be able to time her riposte really well, which you just have to learn the timings on all of your matchups, and a lot of Fiora really comes down to, can you riposte their key move? and that does take pretty fast reaction times, right? So you have to see it coming, something like a Malphite ultimate, or just whatever their big move is, the Renekton stun. You just have to be able to block that damage and get that stun. So there are a lot of fancy moves you can do with her. You can dash while you're channeling your riposte. You can still dash towards them, riposte the damage or the CC, and then reposition to hit them for the stun. So it's all about the riposte. Like, that's most of the mechanics to her. The rest of it is just running people down, and just trying to get the right position to trigger all of your true damage marks, and to get your auto attack resets and stuff like that with blade work. But most of what she does is pretty simple, it's pretty straightforward, except for the riposte. So that will make or break most players. But kind of like Camille, she just has a wide variety of items that she can play. Right now, Divine Sunder, Ravenous, Hydra, but there's a lot of stuff. So if any of those get nerfed, she, Divine gets nerfed or whatever, she can just go Trinity and it's probably fine. Really good duelist. She doesn't have the same kind of CC that Camille has, so she doesn't have that lockdown. But I would say that she probably does much higher consistent damage, especially to tanks. Camille does a lot, but a lot of that is also dependent on her Q charge true damage, versus Fiora is going to have a lot more just consistent damage, where she can constantly keep proccing those vitals. And she's going to have more stickiness, probably as well, just because her dash is on such a low cooldown and she gets that extra movement speed if she does pop the vitals. So good champion, but much more of a duelist, much more all in on the split pushing than someone like a Camille is. She does very little in team fights. If she does trigger all of her ultimate procs, then she does give a lot of health to your team, so it's not like she can't do anything in team fights, but it's just a lot harder to lock people down compared to Camille. But she's still going to be pretty good overall. And then the final one is Irelia that I'll mention. Now, Irelia has had quite a fall from grace. She does have a pretty high ban rate right now, so you got to be careful with that. So that's about a 34% presence in solo queue. I don't think she's played a ton in pro, which is good, because usually if she's played a lot in pro, she gets nerfed almost immediately. But it's very similar profile to all of these other ones. She's tanky, she has a lot of mobility, she has a lot of outplay potential. She can do a ton of damage if you get that passive fully stacked up and you start bouncing around. Now, some of her items, like Shield Bow, if she wants to get that did just get nerfed. So she doesn't have quite as much versatility as some of the other ones, like Trinity and Divine Sunder, just not as good on her as some of the other options. Blade of the Ruined King, I think, in general, is a somewhat underpowered item most of the time. It is good on her, but her itemization's not quite as good as some of the other ones, but it's still pretty good, and you can still take over the game if you're good on Irelia. Okay, moving through to the jungle here, and we'll have to just spend, maybe 10 minutes or so on the rest of these roles, so about 2 minutes a champion here. I think that Lee Sin is going to be one of the better ones, and I know that that's just kind of the meme. Everybody picks Lee Sin. There are some other options that are less popular out there, but with Lee, it just feels like you can always find a way if you're good on that champion. He has great early game pressure, really good mobility, tons of damage, lots of different items that you can get. You can build him more tanky, you can build him more assassin, you can build him more bruiser. So a lot of different playstyles you can go for with him. You do have some utility late game if you can get the flanks and get really good kicks and kick people back into your team. Obviously that's a good engage. You can also peel with it, kick people away who are trying to dive your back line. So a lot of different decisions you can make with him. A lot of fun, obviously, if you're really proficient on the champion. He's thought to fall off late game, but I think a lot of the items in recent years have helped him out quite a bit, be more relevant later in the game. Stuff like Gore Drinker, stuff like Sterix. This gives you a lot more survivability as the game goes on. So it's still not great chart-wise, but I think a lot of the bruiser items have definitely helped him out a little bit over time. So not a ton to say about Lee Sin other than that. Everyone knows he's going to be on any one-trick guide. He's almost always a popular pick in pro, so you do have to be careful with that. But usually people just kind of let him slide in pro. Occasionally he gets tapped, but that is something to be aware of, is that he is almost always played in pro. So you got to be careful with Lee, but if you do get really proficient on him, he is very strong. He has a pretty high pick rate right now of 18%, but his ban rate's not that high at 18%. So, have a backup, but if you like to play Lee, and you can get really good on him. I think that he is a good one-trick option. Kha'Zix is another one, and I would say if you want to learn how to like super hard carry, Kha'Zix might be a better choice than Lee. Number one, Kha'Zix is picked and banned a lot less. He's at like maybe 15%. He has almost no pro presence, I don't think. Sometimes Kha'Zix comes into pro, but it's rare. It's only when he's like at his most OP. I think once they reworked his R where he doesn't get free invisibility like constantly in bushes, then he kind of fell out of pro for the most part. So he's pretty good, and there are different builds you can do with him. Obviously, he wants to go assassination type of stuff most of the time, your Dustblade, Ghostblade, but there have been some metas where he has gotten stuff like Gore Drinker, and, you know, some Bruiser type of builds. So that's not common right now, and most of the time he's going to go for the lethality stuff, but he does have the option of getting some other things. And even in the lethality tree itself, they've added a lot of new tools that can help out. So you have, obviously, your Dustblade and your Ghostblade. Both of those are quite good. But now you can get your Axiom Arc to have more ultimates. You can get Edge of Night to help you out with the bubble. You can even get the ward sweeping item, Umbral, if you want to. So there are a lot of different lethality items. Sereldas can be pretty good for that extra slow. You already do have a pretty big slow on your W, but he's just gotten a lot of new toys for lethality champions out there. So you do have to be careful with Kha'Zix because he's going to have a big problem with tanks most of the time. But you do have the invisibility to get those flanks in there. You can completely delete people. You do have resets potentially with his E, although most people are not evolving the E as quickly, so they're not doing the reset builds as often. They're just going for the raw damage in the Q and then the utility of the W, it looks like. But he's pretty good. Now, the first strike is particularly nice with Kha'Zix because you're going to get that 10% extra true damage, and you almost always get to hit them first because you're coming in invisible. So that is good. Obviously, in the past, he's done very well with Electrocute. So it's just a lot of different runes he can work with, a lot of different items. He is kind of all in on the assassination, so his playstyle doesn't... You don't have that many unique choices there. But it's going to be a strong champ. Nunu's another one that I like, and this is a good, fairly non-mechanical choice. Like, Nunu's pretty easy, and he's a tank, so he's not going to carry through damage. But he does have really, really good ganks in the early game with his snowball. It's very fast, really long range. He's probably one of the best gankers in the game, pre-6, on a tank, which is nice. That's rare. Usually the early game gankers, the Lee Sins, the Jarvans, and stuff like that, they're, you know, much more kind of all in on the early game, all in on the damage with most of their builds. But Nunu can build up his tankiness, and he's also got that snowball for the ganks. He secures objectives really well with his Q. So Q plus Smite basically guarantees you should get every dragon, you should get every baron if you're in the area. So he can steal it, but he can also keep enemies from stealing it, which is handy. He has really high base stats. He stays really healthy in the jungle off of his clear. So if you get invaded, you might lose a camp, depending on the situation, but you're probably not going to die, so that's good. And then he just has other utility as well. Like, he's got slows off of his E, he has, you know, even more slows off his R, which gives him a pretty big shield. And then with his passive, whenever he auto-attacks people, it's going to give your ADC or whomever benefits the most from attack speed, that extra little bit of movement speed and attack speed. So, and he's got a bunch of different items he can get. You know, usually he goes for some kind of Sunfire item, but then he can also get Dead Man's Plate, he can get Spirit Visage. There's a lot of different ways he can go in terms of his itemization. So I think that Nunu is pretty strong. You know, a big reason that he does fall off is he has a hard time accessing the back line. So if they have a tank on the front, you know, if they have a Tahm Kench or something that can absorb that snowball, and then they're just firing away on you on the back line with like a Twitch or a Jinx or something like that, you can't really deal with that too well, right? Versus Lee Sin and Kha'Zix can find ways to get on the back line and disrupt the ADC. Nunu really can't in most situations. Like, you can try to come in for a flank with the snowball, but it's a bit harder to do. So, really good champ, almost gets no pro play, almost always has a high win rate, but very little play rate and ban rate. He just gets no respect, but he's almost always a strong champion in every meta. So, definitely consider him if you don't want to play like a heavy mechanical jungler. And then we've got Viego, who I think is still pretty strong. He has been nerfed several times, but he's just so versatile in that, you know, obviously he can, when he kills people, you know, he can take their soul or whatever, and then start casting their abilities and heal. And everybody's seen Viego do his thing. So really good snowball champion, especially if you use those abilities of the people's souls that you take. You can get a lot of work done. And he could be somewhat hard to kill, too, if you go for the Divine Sunder build. And I tend to like that build on him. I know some people like to go for the, the heavier damage Kraken build. And that can be good, in some situations. But I think being able to have him, that little bit of extra tankiness is nice, just so you can get those resets. But there are a lot of different items. Like I said, you can go heavier damage. You can go heavier health. A lot of different opportunities for him to hard carry the game. So he's got good wave clear, has really good resets. He's a good duelist. He's just a good overall carry jungler. His utility is lacking a little bit if you don't get those kills for the resets. You don't have that much outside of just your one stun and like just auto attacking people. Like you have the mist, it gives you a little bit of movement speed, but it is going to be a bit harder to have really effective ganks and to get access to the backline in most situations. But he does a ton of damage, and he can melt through front lines too. So I think he's pretty good. And then Graves is the last one that I'll mention here. Graves has fallen out of favor a little bit. Some of the best teams in the world, their junglers do play Graves quite a bit, so he unfortunately gets taxed on that front. I don't think he's been super popular. He's doing all right in pro. But good range champion, does a ton of damage, has great wave clear, surprisingly pretty tanky off of his grit passive. He just gets an unreasonable amount of armor, so very good against other physical damage heavy teams. They did buff Ghostblade a few patches ago. I forgot exactly what they did. They gave it ability haste or something like that, and he really loves that because his ganks are kind of hard early on, but with Ghostblade, if you can run up to people, smoke screen them, and especially if they're close to a wall, you can just do so much damage off of your Q and then your ultimate. So really good, high scaling, basically just tanky ADC in the jungle. So if you need another ranged hard carry, if your team just has too much melee or too much magic damage, then he's going to be a really good option out there. So again, fairly versatile build. He has gone lethality in the past. He's gone kind of more bruisery types of builds in some situations, but overall, strong champ. A little bit lacking on the utility side. Again, he's got his smoke screen, but doesn't bring a lot of CC to the table, doesn't buff up his allies, so he's kind of a greedy pick. But if you think you can get the farm, he can be a pretty strong carry. All right, next we have the mid laners. And mid is almost always a super diverse role, so there are a lot of things you can carry from with the mid lane. But the usual suspects are probably going to be here. These are some of the most high skill cap champs in the game, so you definitely can play more consistent, simpler stuff. Like Malzahar can be really good. Anivia can be like really good right now. But I'm just trying to once again tell you the stuff where if you put in hundreds of games on this champion, you will probably be able to hard carry if you can become really proficient. So Akali's kind of the first one here, and Akali gets a ton of pro attention, and people complain about this champion nonstop, so be careful, with Akali. She's out of the meta right now, it looks like, in pro. She's got 11 games. She's not banned a lot in pro, which is good. She does have a 73% win rate off of 11 games, though, so she is like top 10 pick, something close to top 10 pick with a high win rate, so be careful. But right now, it's not that bad in solo queue. She's got a 7% pick rate, so that's fairly low. 11% ban rates. That's only 18% presence total. So you should be good to go on that front for now. But again, very high risk this champion gets nerfed if she gets good in the pro meta. But the rest of it is just, she's really, really strong. Like, she has a ton of mobility, right? She has her dashes off of her R. She can flip backwards with her E. She gets some extra movement speed with her W. It's hard to interact with her for a lot of champions when she's in that W. And just does a ton of burst damage. And especially because that R is so hard to interact with. Like, if she double R's on top of you and she's got her Q and she, hits you with her E after she R's on top of you, it's so much damage. So lots of mobility, lots of damage. She is a little bit squishier than some of the other options. She doesn't have, shield. She doesn't have high base stats. so that is kind of problematic, but you can take Hourglass and still do enough damage to kill people. I have seen some tankier Akali builds, not like, you know, full tank, but stuff like Rift Maker with, you know, something like Shadow Flame that'll give you like 500 HP. So, you know, there's, and I think I may have seen her get Demonic Embrace. So there are some, you know, bruisery types of builds that aren't as effective or popular right now, but she could go in that direction in theory if she wanted to at some point. So yeah, just tons of mobility, tons of damage, lots of outplay potential, different builds you can do with her, different runes that can be effective on her. So yeah, Akali is just a complete nightmare. If you're good on that champ, she feels really overpowered, and there's a good reason that a lot of high-level people complain about her constantly. Yasuo is another one. Now, Yasuo is really popular, though, and he had not really been played in Pro hardly ever, but then he did sneak his way in Worlds, and there are some players, you know, I think like Caps really like to play him. There are some players that, you know, do enjoy playing Yasuo in Pro, but he's so popular in solo queue. If he's not the most popular, he's got to be one of... Yeah, he's the second most popular champ right now. And he gets a lot of hate from people. People really, really hate Windwall in the mid lane because it just stops people from doing what they want to do. And people hate no champions that deny you from doing stuff. So, he does have about a 36% presence, so that's not, like, completely ridiculous. But it's, you know, enough to be aware of. But other than that, you know, if you can play him, if you can be proficient on him, he has a lot of mobility, does a ton of damage, lots of outplay potential. Most of his abilities have the potential to be AoEs. You can completely wipe up entire teams, kind of like Riven. If you make the right plays, he is one of the more famous one-tricks. You know, Mo, Yasuo, the content creator, really, you know, got his name playing Yasuo, and lots of other people, you know, have become semi-famous from playing Yasuo as well. So, very good champion, super high skill cap. You know, right now he is getting, like, you know, the Immortal Shield Bow type of build. I don't know if that's gone downhill. It looks like people are still getting that, even though it did get nerfed on him. It's still going to be a pretty good item, but yeah, lots of different things that he can build. Obviously, he does need to build crit items most of the time. In the past, I think he has... People have experimented with some goofy stuff, like, in years past, like Wit's End and, you know, some more utility type of items, but he really wants crit. So if crit's in a bad place, he could be in a bad place, but overall, I think crit's all right now, and he's going to be really strong. So that wind wall is a very good utility, not just for you, but for your whole team. Being able to stop the projectiles is helpful. He's so difficult mechanically. It's just like Riven. He might even be harder than Riven. He'd be one of the few champions, I would say, could give Riven a run for her money in terms of mechanics. But part of that is also just you can get yourself into trouble with Yasuo. You know, taking those tornadoes when you really shouldn't. Taking those ultimates when you shouldn't. Can be a huge problem for him. So you have to have restraint. You have to understand when you should all in, when you shouldn't. And you just can't bait yourself into going for it if it's a bad idea. So... Anyways, he's going to be really good if you can pick him, if he's not banned, and if you're willing to lose 100 games while you learn him, he can be a pretty good pick. Another one is Yone. So, Yone has an even higher pick and ban rate, and this guy's not... He doesn't have the wind wall effect, but I guess people still just hate going against him. He does have, you know, sustain. He does do more magic damage than Yasuo does, so he's a bit harder to itemize against. They did buff his thing that gives him the shield by a ton a few patches ago, his Spirit Cleave. So, you know, he has a ton of outplay potential as well, lots of dive potential, you know, when he uses his W, or whatever it is, his E. Yeah, it's his E. To, you know, go out and kill people and then, you know, rip himself back off of that. You know, he can be pretty good, so, you know, really high skill cap, as I keep saying, really difficult. I can't say much more because I'm not an expert on these champions, so I can't tell you the exact mechanics. There are a lot of guides out there, but I can tell you that if you are very proficient on Yone, he is, you know, one of the best 1v9 champions in the game. I don't think he has hardly any pro presence right now, and he rarely does, which is good, but people really hate to play against him in solo queue. Cassiopeia is another one if you want to play something that's a little more ranged and that is very under the radar. A lot of people just forget about Cassiopeia. But I think she's really strong right now. I've played a decent amount of Cassiopeia in the past, and with the buff to Archangels, only being 2,600 gold, I think that's huge on her. Cosmic Drive did get nerfed, but is still really good for the extra movement speed. So she has good wave clear, really good harassment in the early game, excellent scaling. She takes Barons quickly, Dragons quickly, rips through tanks. You know, she stops mobility with her W. She can stop divers with her ult. So a really good Cassiopeia is just almost impossible to deal with. But she is difficult mechanically to play as well, because it's sort of like an ADC where you have to be attack moving, but you can't actually use the attack move key. You constantly have to move your mouse back and forth if you're trying to kite somebody. So like move back, you know, click back to the left, click over here again to, you know, twin fang them, click back to the left, click over here to twin fang them. So it's really hard to have precise mechanical movements with Cassiopeia and not drop any twin fangs. So that makes her very difficult mechanically, I think. The kiting aspect of it, because again, you can't just attack move. You have to actually click on the champion a lot. So anyways, but really high scaling, great champion. She does have to get Archangels, but other than that, she's got a lot of different items that she can get and be effective. And they just buffed Archangels, so they're committed to making that a good item. At least good for Cassiopeia. And the final one that I'll mention here is going to be Twisted Fate. So, and that's tough because there are a lot of different things that could be good, but I think that Twisted Fate does see a decent amount of pro play, and I wanted something else to recommend that was a little bit lower on the mechanical side. So there's almost no mechanics to him outside of pulling the correct card, and he has really good pressure in side lanes, and especially now that teleports are not going to be active, or it's going to be a lot harder to teleport to the side lanes pre 14 minutes, he's going to have a unique skill where people aren't going to be able to follow him as easily when he ports down. He's got a point-click stun with the gold card. He has really good wave clear. He gets extra gold off of his passive. So, just overall, really strong champion. Everfrost is great because you can chain that together with your gold card for, like, you know, over 3 seconds of CC. So, overall, really strong champion. There are a few different builds you can get with him. There are, in the past, people have tried, like, on-hit builds or, like, Trinity builds and stuff like that. And most of the time, they're not as good, but it is on the table if the meta evolves that way. If some of those items get, like, super buffed, he would be able to take advantage of that. So, you're mostly playing him just for the map presence and the consistency of the gold card, but still going to be a very strong champ. And then in bot lane, we'll pick it up here a little bit. I think that Kai'Sa is probably the place to be. Now, Kai'Sa almost always finds a way to be strong. Now, she hasn't been as good this season statistically for a lot of it, or at least in Season 11, because she has very specific breakpoints to where you get the missile upgrade on her Q, and you need to get that early on, and they messed with the formula on that. I'm not an expert on Kai'Sa, but they dropped the AD on almost all of the big-ticket AD items. They dropped it by like 10, 15 AD, and gave it more utility. So they gave it other stuff, you know, like lifesteal or attack speed or whatever. So when people were first picking stuff like Kraken that only has 65 AD on it, that's really hard on Kai'Sa because, you know, in the past, she, you know, used to be able to get like 80 off of Infinity Edge or at least 70 off of Infinity Edge. So I don't know the exact breakpoints on her, but she has found a build now that can be pretty good in pro play. I don't think she was played a ton in recent pro. No, not really. But in solo queue, I have seen this build do fairly well with Muramana into Nashor's Tooth, and then you end up doing quite a bit of magic damage as well. Your W pokes for a ton, but you still do pretty good with your auto attacks. She's really a dive ADC though, so you need to have a dive comp with her. She's going to perform poorly into poke. She's pretty short range, so it can be a little dangerous in team fights if they have a lot of CC or, you know, malfights or, you know, things like that that could get on top of you. But overall, Kai'Sa almost always is able to find a way, if you're proficient on her, to be strong because she has the mobility, she has the invisibility, she's got the shield off of her ultimate, she has some poke with her W if you go for the AP build, she has nice isolation damage with her Q. So she's just kind of the quintessential, you know, hard carry, diving ADC. So maybe she doesn't deserve to be quite that high, but I think she should be somewhere in somebody's, you know, top 5 potential champs right now. Jin is another one who is really good, and a lot of his items haven't really been nerfed. Gale Force, I think, got tapped earlier in the season, but other than that, they've left Collector alone, which is really good on him. They've left Infinity Edge alone, so they seem pretty committed to Jin's itemization path. In theory, he can still get lethality stuff if he wants to, like he could get a Ghost Blade or something like that, but I think most of the time you're just going to want Collector as that second item. And obviously Gale Force is extremely good with him because you can Gale Force forward, do the damage off of that active, and then fourth shot him to just completely blow a lot of champions out. So in a meta that's not like totally dominated by tanks, Jin's going to be pretty good, and that's the sort of meta that we're in, and that's probably the meta we're going to be in. Riot seems pretty committed to not bringing back the unkillable tanks, the 60% win rate of Mumus, Sejuanis, Ramesses, that type of stuff. So if they're committed to using more bruisers or buffing up bruisers and making them frontliners instead of the full-on turbo tanks, then Jin's going to be pretty good into that meta. So high scaling champion, really good kill threat in the early game, really high burst damage against squishies, just overall strong champ. And then Aphelios is another one, and this is kind of the pro play special. You better practice him a lot because he has a really low win rate. In solo queue, he's like almost 45%, but then in pro play, he's almost always one of the highest contested, highest win rates ADCs. He's got the range. He has so much utility, like really good AoE damage with his fire gun. He's got the potential for a root with his purple gun. He has awesome dueling power if he has the red and the white guns combined. So there's just so many crazy things you can do on Aphelios if you're good at positioning and if you can not only pick the right gun in the moment, but conserve your ammo and, direct your team, ping a lot, when you have the red and the white gun and you're ready for a team fight. Try to get your team to force a fight right there. So it does take some coordination and knowledge on your team to understand when they should and shouldn't fight based on your ammo, but you also have to communicate that to your team. So he's really timing tempo based. He's, like I said, turbo OP in the right situations. If you pick the right fights, when you have the right guns and you execute the right mechanics, he's by far the strongest ADC in the game, I think. But it's just all about setting yourself up for those situations and executing. So super strong champion, lots of utility, but lots of places for people to mess up. Has a pretty versatile build path too. Pretty much anything with crit is going to be good on him. Gale Force right now is what he's doing. In the past, like you can do Shield Bow, you can do Kraken. Kraken used to be the go-to until they nerfed its interaction with his W. But he's still going to be really strong. So he doesn't have dashes, he doesn't have any shields, he doesn't have any way of, managing ganks. So you just have to be really, really careful with his positioning. But other than that, great champ. Ezreal is the next one here, and Ezreal can just always find a way. Like, he's rarely going to be the highest sustained damage dealer if you're just sitting there auto-attacking. Most other champs are going to do more. But he just has a very unique kit that's just always relevant in solo queue especially, and a lot of times in pro. Where he can just poke so easily with his Q. It's hard to deny him farm, so if your support's roaming or your support's kind of having a tough game, you can still get your farm with the Qs. It does really high burst damage. If you hit everything, you can blow people up, especially squishy champs in the early game. So if your support does get a good engage, you drop a W on them, Q, EN, auto attack Q, it can definitely blow people up. Really nice sort of surprise burst potential if you are somebody out of a bush and then engage on them. So he has a lot of high burst potential, really good poke, pretty decent sustained poke damage if you're constantly having to run away and kite. He can be really proficient. And then he has a few itemization options that can make him difficult for people to deal with. So he can get Frozen Heart, for example, make it hard to dive him. He could take a defensive boot if he really had to. Usually you want Ionians. But it's really that Frozen Heart that kind of sets you up for success against a lot of like Zeds, Talons, that type of stuff that would completely destroy other ADCs. He's going to have at least some kind of game against that, potentially with some of his itemization builds. So really high skill cap. You got to hit all of those skill shots. But if you do, he's going to be a strong champ. And then finally, I've got Twitch. Now, that might be a little unusual, but I just think that Twitch is just a great solo queue special. The invisibility is just so hard for people to deal with. People are just not going to respect it at all, and you get so many free kills just roaming the middle or just even ganking your own lane off of the Twitch. And then he just snowballs so hard. Like, once he gets ahead, he can completely delete individuals and entire teams with his R. So he's a must-answer threat where even if you fall behind early, you can find ways to get back into the game with your invisibility or with your huge range in team fights. And he is somewhat versatile in that he does have an AP build that's not super meta right now, but has been pretty good in the past. It's not horrible. You know, it's like a 51% win rate off your first item, and then it gets better at your second item. You know, once you get the death cap, it about matches Hurricane and Collector. It's pretty close. So if you first pick Twitch and then your team picks all AD, you can go AP, and it can be reasonably effective because your poison, if you have a bunch of AP, can do AP damage. So it is a little gimmicky, but it can work out. So Twitch, strong, snowball champion, great at team fights, AP option, good champion. And then the last few here, and I'll spend a little bit less time on the supports just because I talk about supports so much every patch because that's my main role. So come by, check out the stream, check out my support tier list that I do every single patch if you want more detailed. But again, I do want to try to keep this, you know, around 59 minutes, so we'll just blast through these fairly quickly. Rakan, you know, is the one that I would personally recommend. I'm sure it's not a shock to a lot of people. We might go a little bit over an hour, but whatever. But he's just so good. He has really strong engage with his R plus his W. He can access the back line really well. He has reasonable sustain in the laning phase. He has that repeatable shield. He has his Q that you can land on people to heal yourself and your allies. So he has an easier time against poke than some of the other engaged champions in the laning phase. His itemization does a lot to help your allies. So not only does he have good engage, but he also buffs allies with the Shirelias, with the Zeeks. Most of the time, he can get Chemtech Putrefier, which is way better than Thornmail in a lot of situations, which his other engaged tank counterparts have to get. So it's just really strong. Good engage, but also good scaling with the shield and with the utility you can give your allies. So he is going to be squishier than something like a Leona or Thresh or some of these other tanks. But if you can maneuver correctly and not get caught, not get chain CC'd and blown up, which is sometimes easier said than done, then I think he is a really strong option. Thresh is another one that gets a lot of attention in pro, so you got to be careful about that. And in solo queue, people just love playing Thresh. He's the most notorious one-trick of all time from the support role. Super famous champ. Probably the best designed champ in all of League of Legends. He's like, I think most people would put him right there with like Lee Sin in terms of best design. But really fun to play, super high skill cap. You have to be able to not only land your hooks, but then decide, should you actually take that hook? Should you go in on that, or should you wait? Because he has the option. You could just hook and just let your ADC or whoever get some poke in. You don't have to actually take it if you don't want to. And then if you are going to take the hook, then you have to decide, okay, are you going to throw a lantern on one of your allies so your allies can go with you, or are you going to save that lantern for a different situation? Are you going to flay them immediately whenever you land, or are you going to wait for them to use their mobility and try to interrupt it when they try to dash or flash away? Or are you going to try to save that flay for, you know, when they're going to try to dive your AD carry? So there are so many different ways you can use all of his abilities, especially his W and his E, whether defensively or offensively, and that gives him, you know, a lot of power, but it can also be very difficult to master him because of those things. So not only is he mechanically somewhat challenging because his hook is fairly slow and has a really slender hitbox compared to things like Blitzcrank or Nautilus or other hook champions. So not only is his hook hard to land, but then the decisions you have to make when you're trying to land that hook can be tough. And also, flay is really hard to time correctly. If someone's trying to jump on your AD carry, you have to be looking for it. You have to be lined up. You have to get the geometry right so that you can flay them off of them, and then you have to actually press it at the right time. So difficult mechanically and difficult in terms of decisions. But if you can master those things, he's almost always going to be one of the best just because he provides such an awesome blend of offense and defense. And kind of like Rakan, he can typically take utility items that help your team out. Stuff like Locket, Knight's Vow, sometimes even Redemption, whereas some of the heavier tanks are going to have to take bigger tank items a lot of the time. So anyways, Thresh, very, very good if you're proficient on him. You do need to kind of, take over the game early because later on his damage does fall off pretty hard and he can have a hard time accessing the backline. So whereas Rakan can just kind of dash through everybody, potentially and, hit the backline ADC or whatever, Thresh has a hard time doing that, right? Like he can flash flay if you need to, but his effective engage range is much lower than Rakan's, especially with a dive comp. Rakan can easily shield over to the diver and then go off of that with a W to CC someone else, versus Thresh has to run up there himself and try to get into position. So anyways, lots of potential, but very difficult to play. Leona's another one that just always finds a way. She's just always good in pro. She's been picked basically permanently for 3 or 4 years. And if you can become proficient on her, she's one of the best hard carry supports out there because her engage and her cooldowns are so short, right? Like your E ends up being like a 5 or 6 second cooldown. Her Q's like a 5 second cooldown. Her ultimate's a 90 second cooldown. So you can just constantly just run around, engage, and just force fights, force kills all over the map if you really understand where you should be rotating and who's strong and where you can find those kills. You've got the power. It's in your hands. You can press that go button almost anytime you want. You just have to make the right decisions about the go button. So she has definitely fallen off a bit here. They did nerf her a few patches ago. I think they took a little bit of armor off of her W, but she's still going to be very strong, very efficient. Tons and tons of CC, lots of utility. So if you're looking for something for the long term and you like engage champs, I think Leona's the place to be. And then if you want to play an enchanter, Lulu is the one that I would recommend. Now she does have a lower win rate than Sona or Soraka, but Sona and Soraka are very, very reliant on items to be strong. So Moonstone has to be strong for those champions to be strong most of the time. So they have really good scaling with items. But I think that Lulu's kit itself is going to be much more stable. Like she doesn't need specific items. Items are good on her, but she doesn't scale as hard on items. It's just her kit itself that has the power, right? The 2.25 second polymorph, the really high base infusion of health on the ultimate, the 80 extra on attack damage that she hands out off of her passive. So all of these things combine to make her a lot stronger, just independent of any specific items or runes. But she's great at buffing up allies. If you have a really good ADC or a Master Yi or just anything else that's going to be attacking a lot, she can buff them up a ton. So I think Lulu is one of the better scaling options independent of the items. So I suspect Moonstone is probably going to be nerfed at some point, maybe not, but if it doesn't get a lot of pro attention, maybe it won't get nerfed. But I would say Lulu if you want to play like a long-term enchanter. Although if you're pretty confident that Moonstone's not going to get nerfed, Sona can be pretty good too. And then Bard is the last one that I'll mention. Bard almost always finds a way to be like a 51, 52% champion. And he's really not dependent on items. It really doesn't matter what the items are. I mean, right now he's doing Even Shroud, Frozen Heart, kind of a tankier build. But you can just always find fights with his R. You can, protect towers from Rift Herald with his R. There's just so many different tricks you can do with that R if you become proficient on it. And he just roams so well off of those tunnels. You can influence the jungle. You can influence mid lane. You can get deep wards really easily. And then if you're good at hitting those Qs for the stuns, you can get some really big stuns in team fights. I mean, stunning 2 different people for 2 seconds is a huge deal in a team fight. And especially if you land your R on 2 people and they're just lined up perfectly and they don't have flash, and you can just time it to get that, 2 second stun off of the R, then he's going to be pretty strong. So, versatile champ, usually builds tanky these days. In the past, he's, you can build some AP items or utility items like Redemption and Locket if you want to. A lot of different ways you can do it. It really doesn't matter. It all just comes down to how well do you roam in terms of your decision making and how proficient are you at hitting your Rs and making those decisions around your R. But anyways, that's going to be it. Hopefully I gave you some ideas for champions you might want to play this season. Let me know in the comments, what do you think? Again, I know someone's going to be saying, but what about this champ? But what about that champ? I tried the best I can. I tried to cover 25 champions. But if you just get a ton of practice on whichever champion you pick, you can probably make it work at the end of the day. I was just trying to give you some ideas and some reasoning about the kinds of champs that I would recommend to people if they want to put in a lot of time and try to one-trick something. But anyways, that's going to be it. Thank you very much. Have a good day, and we'll see you next time.